I heard the knock at 11:17 on a Saturday night, which I know precisely because I was watching the clock on my microwave while waiting for leftover soup to heat up, and the specific combination of the hour and the sound made no immediate sense to me. People don't knock on apartment doors at 11:17 on Saturday nights unless something has gone badly wrong. Opened it without thinking too hard about that. The woman standing in my hallway was wearing a wedding dress, not metaphorically. An actual wedding dress, the kind with a long skirt that had picked up dust from the hallway floor. A fitted bodice with small buttons up the back that someone's hands would have carefully closed a few hours earlier, and a veil that was hanging off to one side like it had survived something. She was holding her heels in one hand, standing in bare feet on the faded carpet outside my apartment, and her mascara had run in 2 clean lines down her face that she hadn't bothered to wipe away. She looked like she'd been crying and had stopped and was now on the other side of it. In that particular stillness that comes after, she looked at me the way people look at a lifeguard when they've already stopped drowning on their own but still want someone nearby in case it starts. "Again, I'm sorry," she said. "I know this is completely insane. I live in 4C. My name is Ava. I had spoken to the woman from 4C exactly 4 times in the 11 months I'd lived in this building. Once in the mailroom when we'd both grabbed the wrong stack of envelopes and had to sort it out. Once in the elevator when there'd been a building-wide power flicker, and we'd both looked up at the lights at the same moment. Once in the laundry room when her dryer had stopped mid-cycle, and I'd shown her the trick with the door latch. And once in the hallway when she'd been carrying too many grocery bags and I'd taken 2 of them without asking because it seemed obvious. 4 conversations, all of them brief, none of them memorable. She was the kind of neighbor you recognize entirely but don't know at all. I had never seen her in a wedding dress before. "Do you want to come in?" I said. "Because what else do you say?" She came in. I watched her look around my apartment the way people do when they're trying to get their bearings in an unfamiliar space, cataloging things without meaning to. The books stacked on the floor that hadn't made it to shelves yet. The half-finished woodworking project on the work table by the window. A small side table I'd been building from reclaimed oak for the last 3 weeks because I'd decided I needed a hobby that made actual objects. The microwave still counting down with my forgotten soup inside it. The general organized but lived-in quality of a single man who takes decent enough care of his apartment but doesn't stress about it. She sat on my couch, which she somehow did without making the dress seem ridiculous, and held her heels in her lap like she wasn't sure what else to do with them. I turned the microwave off and put the kettle on instead. "You don't have to tell me anything," I said, from the kitchen keeping my voice level, the same tone I'd use explaining the dryer trick. "I can make tea or coffee if you want something stronger in that direction, and you can just sit there until whatever this is starts to feel more manageable." "That's fine." There was a short silence. "I left my wedding," she said, as if that wasn't entirely visible from where I was standing. "I figured. I didn't actually make it to the wedding. I left the reception. We were 20 minutes into the reception and She stopped. Started again more slowly. I put down my champagne glass on the table and I walked out through the back of the venue and I just kept walking. I didn't have my phone. I didn't have shoes, apparently, because I took them off at some point because they hurt. And I walked about 6 blocks and then I was back here. And my own door is locked and my keys are in a bag that's back at the venue with everything else. And your light was on. My name is Daniel Ashford. I'm 32 years old and I teach woodworking and fabrication at a community college. Which means I spend most of my days in a workshop helping people understand the patience required to make something from nothing. I moved into the building on Crescent Street 11 months earlier after a long-term relationship ended in the specific, unheroic way those things end when 2 people are more comfortable together than they are in love. A slow untangling rather than a break. The kind you can almost miss while it's happening because nobody raises their voice. My apartment was the right size for one person who wanted space to work, with a long wall of windows facing east that I'd filled with a workbench and a shelf of tools, and the specific organized clutter of someone who builds things as a form of thinking. I had no real complaints about my life. It was quiet, it was organized, it had good coffee and a project to work on, and students who sometimes surprised me with what they made when someone finally gave them permission to make it. I had not expected at 11:17 on a Saturday to pour chamomile tea for a woman in a wedding dress sitting on my couch. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked, bringing the tea over. "Or would you rather we just be quiet for a while?" She took the mug with both hands. "His name is Owen," she said. "Owen Larch. We've been together for 4 years. He's a perfectly good person. He's thoughtful and responsible, and his family loves me, and everyone loves us together, and on paper I should have walked down that aisle and meant every word. But you didn't." She shook her head slowly. I stood there in the reception venue and I watched him laugh at something his cousin said. And I thought, I'm going to spend the rest of my life watching this man laugh. And I felt... She paused, looking for the right word. Nothing. Not dread, not panic, just nothing. Like I was watching a movie about someone else's wedding and I'd accidentally wandered into my own. I sat down in the armchair across from her, at a distance that felt right for a stranger's living room, and I didn't say anything immediately, because the sentence didn't seem to need a response so much as a witness. I know how that sounds, she said. It sounds like the truth. She looked at me. You don't think I made a terrible mistake? I think leaving a marriage you're not sure about is a much smaller mistake than staying in one you're not sure about, I said. Though I'm not really qualified to have an opinion either way. I'm the man from the laundry room. Something shifted in her face. Something that wasn't quite a smile but was in the same neighborhood as one. You fixed the door latch, she said. I've been using that trick for 5 months. It's a design flaw on those machines. They should put it in the manual. The evening settled around us in a strange, provisional way. The lamp on the side table threw warm light across the room. Outside, the city made its usual Saturday night sounds. A car horn, someone's music passing by, the distant, reliable hum of a place that never fully quiets. Ava sat on my couch in a wedding dress and drank chamomile tea, and I sat in my armchair and let the quiet do whatever work it needed to do. She started talking after a while, not in a rush, but in the way people talk when they've been holding something too long, and the weight of the holding finally outweighs the comfort of the privacy. She told me about Owen, how they'd met at a mutual friend's dinner party, how he'd been steady and easy from the very first conversation in a way that felt like relief after a bad few years. She told me about the engagement, how it had felt right at the time in the same way that a lot of decisions feel right when you're tired of uncertainty. She told me about planning the wedding, how somewhere in the middle of choosing centerpieces and seating arrangements, she'd noticed a distance opening between what she was doing and what she was feeling, a small gap that she'd kept expecting to close on its own, the way you expect a minor ache to disappear if you just give it time. I kept thinking I'd feel more, she said. On the morning of the wedding, I stood in the bridal suite and my maid of honor was telling me I looked beautiful and everyone was crying happy tears. And I was just standing there thinking about whether I'd remembered to put the dry cleaning in to be picked up on Monday. That's what I was thinking about. Dry cleaning. On my wedding morning, did you try to say anything to anyone? Who would I have said it to? She looked at her tea. Everyone was so happy. My mother has been planning this wedding in her head since I was 12. Owen's parents flew in from Portland. There were 200 people in that building who'd bought flights and gifts and dresses and taken time off work. You don't say I'm not sure at that point. You just... She spread one hand, a small, helpless gesture. You trust that the feeling will come, that this is just nerves, that you're just scared of the big step, the way everyone is. But it wasn't nerves, I said. It wasn't nerves, she confirmed quietly. It was information. I thought about that for a moment. The lamp flickered once, the way old lamps do, and steadied. I understand that distinction, I said. The difference between fear and knowing. Ava looked at me with something more attentive than before. You sound like you've sat with that difference yourself. I had. I told her about Claire, not the dramatic version because there wasn't one, just the honest one. 4 years together, 2 of them genuinely good, 2 of them the slow accumulation of mornings where we were kind to each other but not really present, where the conversation was easy but the silence was easier because it required nothing, where we'd stopped asking each other hard questions because we both knew the answers would be uncomfortable. We'd ended it on a Tuesday evening in February with a kind of mutual, almost relieved clarity that I'd found more devastating in retrospect than it had felt in the moment. Not because I missed her specifically, but because it made me understand that comfort and love were not the same thing, and I'd confused them for 2 years without noticing. Tuesday in February, Ava repeated. That's a very specific memory. It was raining. We split a bottle of wine and talked for 2 hours about something that should have been said much sooner. We were both fine by the end of it, which told me something about what we'd actually been. She was quiet for a moment. Owen is going to be so confused, she said. Not sad, exactly. Waited. He didn't do anything wrong. That's the hardest part. He was exactly who he always said he was. He's going to spend a long time wondering what he should have done differently, and the answer is nothing. There was nothing. It was just the wrong fit that looked like the right one for a long time. Someone's going to have to tell him that eventually, I said. Not tonight, but eventually. And you're going to have to find a way to explain something that doesn't have a clean explanation, which is hard, but it's not impossible. She set her mug on the coffee table and looked at me for a long moment. "You're very calm," she said. "Most people would either be telling me to go back or calling the situation dramatic. You're just here." "I teach people how to work with their hands," I said. "Most of what I actually teach is patience and the willingness to sit with a problem long enough for the right solution to become obvious. I just transferred the skill set." That made her laugh. The first real one, a short, surprised sound that changed the atmosphere of the room by several degrees. "I'm sitting in a stranger's apartment in a wedding dress at midnight," she said. "This is not how I expected tonight to go." "No," I agreed. "But you seem like you're handling it with a remarkable amount of composure." "I'm absolutely not composed," she said. "I just ran out of falling apart about an hour ago. We talked until 2 in the morning. Not about Owen or the wedding or the logistics of what came next, but about other things. The way people talk when they've gotten past the presenting situation and found something more interesting beneath it." She was a graphic designer who specialized in book covers, which meant she spent her days thinking about how to make strangers pick up objects they'd never otherwise notice. I asked her how you made something catch an eye without saying too much, and she talked about the specific discipline of restraint for 20 minutes with the focused energy of someone who'd been waiting to explain their work to someone who wanted to actually understand it. She pulled her knees up onto the cushion and used her hands when she talked, the way people do when they're really in the thing rather than just describing it. And she said something I wrote down mentally and haven't lost since, that the best covers don't explain the book. They create a question the reader needs to answer, and the only way to answer it is to open the first page. I told her about the side table I was building, and she came and looked at it, still in the dress, running her fingers along the joint where I'd matched 2 pieces of grain that I'd been quietly proud of. And she asked the right questions, the ones that showed she was actually looking at the thing rather than being polite about it. She asked about the wood, where it came from, why reclaimed, what the difference felt like between working with new material and material that had already been somewhere. I told her that old wood had already learned its shape, had already responded to years of temperature and humidity and use, and working with it meant working with all of that history rather than against it. She stood there for a moment, one hand on the table, and said, "That sounds like a philosophy." I told her most things that take long enough become one. "You care about this in a specific way," she said. "Objects made well outlast almost everything else," I said. I find that genuinely comforting. She turned and looked at me in the lamplight of the workshop corner of my apartment, and something in her expression was different from the expression she'd come in with, less the aftermath of catastrophe, more something quieter and more present. "I don't even know your name," she said. "4 conversations in a year and I never caught your name." Daniel. Daniel. She said it the way Clara had said James, testing the weight of it. "I've borrowed your dryer trick 5 months and never knew your name. That feels like an oversight now." "It's a big building," I said. "People don't always get around to names." She went back to the couch and I made more tea, and at some point past 2, we ran out of conversation in the good way. The way where silence doesn't feel like absence, but like a natural breath between sentences. She tucked her feet under the voluminous skirt of the dress and looked out the window at the city lights. And I sat in the armchair and looked at the same lights, and neither of us felt the need to fill the air. "Around 3, she said. "I'm going to need to call someone in the morning, my maid of honor. She'll be beside herself, probably," I said. "But that's a morning problem. Tonight's problem is solved, is it? You're sitting somewhere warm. You have tea? Nobody is asking you to make any decisions tonight. That's solved enough." She looked at me. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for the tea, for not making this into something I had to explain or justify or perform any particular feeling about." "You showed up at the right door," I said. "Anyone else in the building might have called someone." "I would have too," she said. "But your light was on and I thought—" She stopped, seemed to reconsider the sentence. I remembered the laundry room. I thought someone who fixes a broken thing quietly without making a production of it was probably someone who could just be here. I didn't have anything to say to that. So I didn't say anything, and the silence that followed was the comfortable kind. The kind that doesn't ask anything of you. She fell asleep on the couch somewhere around 4, still in the dress, covered with the blanket I brought out and set near her without waking her. I sat in the armchair for a while longer, not entirely sure why, and then went to bed and lay in the dark thinking about the distinction she'd made. Information, not nerves. Morning came gray and quiet, the kind of Sunday morning that doesn't announce itself, but simply accumulates. I heard her awake before I saw her, the soft sound of movement, then the distinct sound of someone staring out a window without meaning to make noise. When I came out of my room, she was standing by the workshop table again, looking at the unfinished side table in the early light, the dress creased and slightly less structured than it had been the night before, her hair coming down from whatever arrangement it had been in. "Good morning," I said. "Good morning." She turned. "I'm going to need to borrow a phone, and eventually some clothes, if that's not too much to ask." She called her maid of honor from my kitchen while I made coffee, keeping her voice low in the particular way of someone handling hard news with as much care as they can manage. I heard most of it without trying. The apologies, the explanations, the long listening pauses, the point where her voice went raw for about 30 seconds and then steadied again. I moved around the kitchen quietly, put 2 plates on the counter, found bread that was still good, got out the coffee things, tried to give her as much privacy as a single room would allow. When she hung up and came back to the kitchen counter where I'd poured her a mug, she looked exactly like someone who had done the hardest part of a hard thing and was still upright on the other side. There was something clarified about her expression now, like a lens that had been slightly out of focus had finally adjusted. "She's coming," she said. "She's not angry. I don't deserve how not angry she is. People who love you tend to want you to be okay more than they want you to have behaved perfectly," I said. Ava wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at me for a moment. "I don't know what to do with you," she said. "In what sense?" "In the sense that you let a stranger in a wedding dress into your apartment at midnight and made tea and talked to her until 4 in the morning and didn't once make her feel like a spectacle or a problem to be solved. And now I'm going to put on your oversized sweater and wait for my maid of honor and probably never see you again because what reason would we have? And that seems like a genuine shame. I'm trying to figure out what the appropriate thing is to say about that." I handed her the sweater I'd left on the back of the chair. "The laundry room is on the 2nd floor," I said. "I'm usually there Sunday mornings. The trick with the door latch still works." Something moved through her expression that I'd never seen on the face of someone who'd knocked on my door before. Not relief, not gratitude, something more deliberate. The look of someone who has just made a small, private decision. "Sunday mornings," she said. "Most of them." Her maid of honor arrived 40 minutes later. A small, fierce woman named Jess, who hugged Ava for a long time in my hallway, and then looked at me over her shoulder with an expression I interpreted as simultaneous suspicion and reluctant gratitude. I handed them a bag with the dress folded carefully inside, because I'd worked with enough fabric in woodworking classes to know how to fold a delicate material without destroying it, and Ava stood at my doorway for a moment before she followed Jess to the elevator. "The side table," she said. "When you finish it, I'd like to see it." "It'll probably be another 3 weeks," I said. "Matching grain takes real patience." "I know where to find you," she said. Then she smiled, the same unguarded one from the night before, and walked down the hallway and the elevator doors closed, and the morning went back to its usual Sunday quiet. 3 weeks later, she knocked on my door on a Tuesday evening. She was wearing ordinary clothes this time, jeans and a blue sweater, hair down, face clear. She had her keys and her phone and everything that belonged to a person who was managing their own life again, with none of the wild provisional energy of someone who just walked 6 blocks from a reception venue with no shoes. She had the look of someone who had come through something and could stand still on the other side of it. She held a small paper bag that turned out to contain 2 coffees and a pastry she'd picked up from the place on the corner that she'd been wanting to try for months, but somehow kept not going to, always telling herself next time without quite getting around to it. "The table," she said, looking past me into the apartment. "Is it done?" I stepped back to let her in, and she came in the way she had 3 weeks earlier, except this time it felt entirely different. It was done. It sat by the window where I'd positioned it to see how it looked in the light, the reclaimed oak warm and smooth, the grain matched at the joint exactly as I'd wanted it. Ava crossed the room and crouched beside it and ran her palm along the surface the way she had weeks earlier in the lamplight, slowly, the way you do when you're actually feeling a thing rather than performing interest in it. "It's good," she said. "It's really good, Daniel." I sat on the couch and she sat in the armchair. The same positions we'd been in 3 weeks earlier, but reversed, as if we'd each quietly traded places now that the ground felt different underfoot. And we drank the coffee while it was still hot and split the pastry, and she told me what the last 3 weeks had looked like. The conversation with Owen that had been as difficult as she'd expected and as necessary, the process of untangling a life that had been lived in close proximity to someone else's for 4 years, The strange sensation of having a lot of people be worried about her and finding, to her own surprise, that she was mostly okay. "Not because I don't feel it," she said. "I feel it. But it's the right kind of hurt. The kind that means something real happened, and you're working through the honest end of it, rather than the kind where you're hurting about something you were never supposed to have." "That's a useful distinction," I said. "I had a good teacher," she said, and looked at me over the rim of her coffee cup in a way that was entirely direct. The way she'd looked at the finished table, clear and without pretense. Seeing the actual thing rather than a version of it she'd decided on in advance. I told her I'd been thinking about a new project. A bookshelf which seemed like an ambitious next step but felt like the right one. She told me she'd taken on a new client, a small independent press whose founder had very strong opinions about what a cover needed to do, but the good kind of opinions. The ones that came from actually thinking about the reader. We talked for 2 hours, and then she helped me clear the coffee cups. And at the door, she paused in a way I was beginning to understand was characteristic of her. A pause that was actually a decision. "Next Sunday," she said. "Laundry room. That's not the right place for any conversation worth having. Could we do something more deliberate?" "Yes," I said, without having to think about it. She nodded once as if confirming a measurement she'd already taken. "Okay," she said. "Good." And she went back down the hall to 4C, and I stood in my doorway a moment longer than I needed to. And then I went back inside to the lamp and the finished table and the quiet apartment that had felt slightly larger than it needed to be. And I thought about patience and grain, and how some things that turn out to be exactly right start with a knock on the door at 11:17 on a Saturday night, when the kettle is already on and the light is already lit, and the only thing left to do is open the door and let what happens happen.